She was running from a scandal that had ruined her name. She signed a contract to become a mail-order bride, a simple transaction to buy back her life. 1,000 miles later, she stepped off a train in a town called Redemption Gulch, ready to marry a man she'd never met, a respectable man, a pillar of the community. But she never counted on the other man, a man with fire in his eyes and the desert in his blood, a man who looked at her not as a bride-to-be, but as a prize he'd already won. They called her a mail-order bride. He called her his. The train was a beast of iron and steam, and for 3 days it had held Rosalind Hayes captive. It screamed across a land that grew harsher with every mile, the soft greens of Missouri giving way to the raw, sun-scalded reds of the Arizona Territory. Each clack of the wheels was a hammer blow, shattering the life she left behind, forging the chains of the life she just purchased. She smoothed the front of her gray dress, the fabric already gritty with a fine red dust that seemed to breathe through the very walls of the railcar. She was 24, but the last few months had aged her a decade. Her world of polite society and leather-bound books had been torched by a scandal not of her own making, but the stain of its smoke clung to her all the same. The advertisement had been less a proposal and more a life raft in a sea of fire. Wealthy, respected landowner in burgeoning town seeks a wife of good breeding and gentle constitution. Object: matrimony and companionship. The letters exchanged with Mr. Alistair Finch had been as dry as the desert air. Formal, precise, devoid of all emotion. It was perfect. A clean slate. A business deal. She was the asset. He was the buyer. As the train hissed to a stop, Redemption Gulch shimmered into view through the heat haze. It wasn't so much a town as a handful of raw-boned buildings, clinging to the dust, cowering under a vast, mercilessly blue sky. The men on the platform, men with battered hats and sun-creased eyes, stopped what they were doing to watch her disembark, the only woman getting off the train alone. Rosalind tightened her grip on her valise, her chin held high, a mask of practiced calm she'd perfected over the last year. It was a good mask. It hid the tremor in her hands. One man detached himself from the crowd. He was tall, dressed in a severe black suit that seemed to absorb and hold the oppressive heat. His hair was silver at the temples, and a pearl stickpin gleamed in his cravat, an obscene little spark of wealth in this dusty landscape. "Miss Hayes," his voice was crisp, brittle. "I am Alistair Finch." "Mr. Finch," she replied, her own voice a stranger in her ears. She offered a gloved hand. His grip was brief, cool, and dry as bone. There was no welcome in it, only the confirmation of a delivery received. "Your journey was satisfactory, I trust?" He spoke like a man checking an invoice. His eyes, the color of faded slate, moved over her. They weren't admiring her. They were assessing her. The posture, the dress, the quality of her luggage. It was an appraisal. A chill that had nothing to do with the setting sun slithered down her spine. "It was long," she managed. "Good. Efficiency is a virtue," he said, and then gestured toward a buckboard. "My man will take your trunk. The house is prepared. The circuit judge will marry us on Saturday. All arrangements have been made." All arrangements had been made. The words fell like stones into the pit of her stomach. This was it, a transaction completed. As he turned to bark an order at the driver, Rosalind took one last look around the platform, a silent goodbye to the last shred of her independence. And that's when she saw him. He wasn't with the others. He stood alone near the station master's office, leaning against the wall as if he owned it. He didn't just occupy the space, he commanded it. He wasn't dressed like the cowboys or the merchants. He wore simple dark trousers and a plain linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms the color of sun-warmed copper, corded with muscle. His hair was jet black, thick and untamed. But it was his eyes that caught her, that seized her. His face was all sharp angles, a heritage carved from the canyons and mesas that surrounded them. And he was watching her, not with the lazy curiosity of the other men. This was different. This was the focus of a hawk sighting its prey. His dark, piercing eyes met hers across the 20 yards of dust and shimmering heat, and the world just stopped. There was no judgment in his gaze, no pity, just an intensity so profound it felt like he could see right through the gray dress, past the polite mask, and into the desperate, terrified heart of the woman beneath. He saw her. He truly saw her. And the sudden, shocking recognition of it was like a lightning strike. Alistair Finch's voice sliced through the moment. "Miss Hayes, is something amiss?" Rosalind tore her gaze away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "No, nothing. The sun is just very strong here." "One becomes accustomed to it," Finch said dismissively, his hand on her elbow a brand of ownership, as he guided her to the buckboard. But he followed her gaze. He saw the man by the station, and his thin lips pressed into a hard, white line. A flicker of something cold and venomous passed through his slate-gray eyes. The other man didn't look away. His gaze shifted from Rosalind to Finch, and a silent challenge passed between them, as clear as a gunshot in a quiet church. Then he gave a slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't for Finch. It was for her. It was an acknowledgement, a greeting, and something more. A promise, or maybe a warning. As the buckboard lurched forward, kicking up a cloud of red dust, Rosalind risked one last look over her shoulder. He was still there, a lone, formidable figure against the dying sun. He hadn't moved. He just watched her go, his expression unreadable, but his presence was a brand seared into her memory. They called her a mail-order bride, a respectable solution to a society scandal. But the look in that stranger's eyes had called her something else entirely. Something wild and untamed, and dangerous. And Rosalind Hayes had the terrifying feeling that her carefully arranged future had just been ripped to shreds before it had even begun. The house was a monument to Alistair Finch's ambition, a two-story block of unforgiving white paint that stood at the edge of town, daring the dust to touch it. Inside, the air was still and smelled of new lumber and polish. The furniture was heavy, dark, and oppressive, ordered from a catalog back east. It wasn't chosen for comfort. It was chosen to be seen, to be valued. It was a museum, not a home. "This will be your domain," Finch announced, a sweeping gesture at the parlor that held no warmth. Stiff velvet chairs stood like soldiers. A grand piano was locked and silent. "You will find the housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, to be competent. She has been instructed as to your needs." Her needs. He spoke of them as if they were items on a list to be checked off. Rosalind drifted through the rooms in a daze. Her bedroom was a cavern dominated by a four-poster bed, big enough for a family, with windows that looked out not on the town, but on the endless, intimidating expanse of the desert. It felt less like a bedroom and more like a watchtower. He had provided everything a wife could want, everything money could buy, but the house was hollow. It was a gilded cage, and she could already feel the cool, smooth bars closing around her. The next few days hammered home the reality of her bargain. Finch was a creature of rigid routine and absolute control. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 6. She was expected to be seated, composed, a silent audience for his monologues on his financial dealings. The failures of the town council, the laziness of his workers. He never asked her opinion. When she dared to offer one, he would smile a thin, patronizing smile and change the subject. It was a performance. Her entire existence was a performance. He especially enjoyed parading her through town. A trip to the Mercantile became a public display of his newest, most valuable acquisition. "Gentlemen," he would boom to the shopkeepers and bankers, "may I present my fiancée, Miss Hayes. She brings a touch of Eastern civility to our humble town." And Rosalind would smile, the mask clicking into place, and endure the stares. The women of the town were worse. Their politeness was a thin veneer over a current of resentment and suspicion. She was an outsider, a purchased woman, a curiosity. The only spark of genuine warmth came from Maeve O'Connell, a fiery Irish woman with a cloud of rebellious red hair who ran the town's boarding house. "Don't you mind them, dearie," Maeve said one afternoon, her voice a low conspiratorial whisper in the Mercantile. "They're just jealous. Finch has been the biggest catch in this territory for 20 years, and not a one of them could land him." Then you step off the train, pretty as a picture. "I am grateful for his generosity," Rosalind replied, the words tasting like ash. Maeve's shrewd blue eyes narrowed. "Generosity and kindness ain't the same horse, child. You remember that? She leaned closer, her voice dropping further. And you be careful. A man like Finch doesn't buy a songbird to hear it sing. He buys it to keep it in a cage. Maeve's warning became a drumbeat in Rosalind's mind. She saw the truth of it in the way Finch corrected her posture at the dinner table, in the way he selected her dress for the day, laying it out on the bed as if she were a doll. His hand on her arm was not an affectionate gesture. It was a manacle. It was during one of these staged walks that she saw him again. The man from the station. He was leaving the land office, his stride long and confident, a liquid grace that made the other men on the boardwalk look clumsy and stiff. He stepped into the dusty street, and his eyes found her instantly, as if a string connected them. He was closer this time. She could see the faint, thin scar that cut through his left eyebrow, giving his intense face a perpetually dangerous edge. Finch's grip on her arm tightened, his knuckles white. "Keep your eyes forward, Miss Hayes." His voice was a whip crack, but she couldn't. The man, Kalen Blackwood, she'd learned his name from whispers in the town, stopped dead in the middle of the street. A wagon rumbled past, but he paid it no mind. His focus was a physical force, pinning her. He didn't smile. He didn't gesture. He just looked. And that look stripped away Finch's ownership, dismissed his very presence. That look said, "You are with the wrong man." "Who is that?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper, pretending an ignorance she did not feel. Finch's face hardened into a mask of pure loathing. "That is Kalen Blackwood, a half-breed who got lucky with a land inheritance. He owns the Blackwood Creek Ranch. He thinks his money makes him a gentleman, but a wolf is still a wolf, no matter what clothes it wears." He pulled her along, his voice dropping to a vicious hiss. "You will stay away from him. He is not our kind." The venom in his tone was startling. It was more than dislike. It was a deep, primal hatred, laced with something that looked a lot like fear. That night, Rosalind lay awake in the grand empty bed, the moonlight striping the floor like prison bars. She thought of the life stretching before her, orderly, silent, suffocating. Then she thought of Kalen Blackwood, the unnerving focus in his eyes, the raw power he projected without a word, the way he looked at her as if he knew a secret about her she hadn't yet discovered herself. She was a mail-order bride. She had traded freedom for security, but for the first time since arriving in Redemption Gulch, she felt a dangerous, rebellious spark of defiance. Maeve was right. She was in a cage, but the door wasn't locked yet, and she had a growing, terrifying suspicion that the wolf outside was the only one who held the key. The days leading up to the Saturday wedding were a masterclass in suffocation. Finch forbade her from walking in town alone. For her safety, he said. She knew it was about possession. A prize isn't left unguarded. Her world shrank to the four white walls of that house in its sterile, manicured garden. Her only flicker of humanity came from Mrs. Gable, the stony-faced housekeeper. On the third day, Rosalind found a tattered copy of Jane Eyre on her bedside table. Nothing was said, but it was a lifeline, a silent acknowledgement that she was a person with a mind, not just an object. An unspoken alliance was forged in that moment. On Thursday, Finch announced a dinner party. "It is important," he stated, leaving no room for discussion, "for the town's key figures to see that the House of Finch is strong, that we are a unified front." The guests were exactly who she expected. The sweaty, portly mayor, the town banker, whose spine seemed to dissolve in Finch's presence, and the sheriff, a man named Bart Coleman, whose weary eyes told a story of 1,000 compromises. Rosalind played the part of the perfect hostess, her smile a beautiful, empty thing. She felt like an actress in a play she despised. After dinner, as the men settled in with brandy and cigars, their self-important voices droning on, she excused herself to the veranda. The cool desert air was a relief. She leaned against the railing, staring at the stars, feeling a loneliness so profound it was a physical ache in her chest. A beautiful night. The voice materialized from the shadows at the end of the porch. It was deep, smooth, and sent a jolt straight through her. A figure detached itself from the darkness. Kalen Blackwood. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Blackwood, what are you doing here?" He would never be one of Finch's guests. He moved closer, his confidence a quiet, unnerving force. He stopped a few feet away, but his presence filled the entire space between them. "I have business with Finch," he said, his voice a low baritone. "A dispute over water rights. He likes to do business after his brandy. Thinks it makes him sharper." A hint of mockery colored the words. "I saw you come out here. You looked like you were suffocating." His directness was a slap in the face. No one had ever spoken to her with such raw perception. "I was simply getting some air," she said, her voice tight. He studied her face in the pale moonlight. "He doesn't suit you, Rosalind Hayes." Hearing her name on his lips was a shock, an intimacy he had no right to claim. "You have no right to say that. You don't know me." "I know what I see," he countered, his gaze intense. "I see a woman with a forest fire in her eyes, trying to convince the world she's made of ice. Finch will douse that fire. He'll chip away at you until all that's left is a pale reflection of himself." A tremor ran through her. He was speaking her deepest fears aloud. "My arrangement with Mr. Finch is a private matter." "Is that what this is? An arrangement?" He took another step. The scent of sagebrush and leather clung to him. "Some things, Miss Hayes, can't be arranged. They aren't lines in a ledger or clauses in a contract. They are matters of the soul." Before she could answer, the parlor door flew open, spilling yellow light onto the veranda. Alistair Finch stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Blackwood." Finch's voice was a low, venomous growl. "I see you've met my fiancée." Kalen didn't turn to face him. Not right away. His eyes stayed locked on Rosalind's for one more beat, a silent promise passing between them. Then slowly, he turned. "Finch," he acknowledged, his tone deceptively mild. "I was just telling Miss Hayes that a spirit as vibrant as hers belongs out in the open, not locked away in a whitewash box." Finch's face contorted with rage. He strode onto the porch, planting himself between them, a physical wall. He grabbed Rosalind's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. "Miss Hayes's place is with me," Finch snarled. "She is to be my wife. What she is will be what I decide. She is mine." That word, mine, hung in the air, ugly and final. A brand. Kalen's face remained a mask, but a dangerous light flared in his dark eyes. He looked past Finch, directly at her. "A man can claim land with a deed, Finch," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried with absolute clarity. "He can claim a horse with a bill of sale, but he can never truly claim a woman's soul. That has to be given." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And Miss Hayes has given you nothing." He held her gaze for one last, searing moment. It was more than a look. It was a declaration of war. Then, with a curt nod, he turned and melted back into the night. Finch's grip became bruising. He dragged her back inside, his face a mask of cold fury. "You will never speak to that man again. Do you understand me?" he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You are my property now. After Saturday, you will not forget who you belong to." That night, Rosalind finally understood. Finch had called her his property, but Blackwood had called her a soul. And in that dusty, God-forsaken town, a battle had just been declared. Not over land or water or money, but over her. The day after the confrontation, the White House was a tomb. Finch's silence was a weapon, an oppressive, suffocating presence. He watched her every move, his slate-gray eyes filled with a cold suspicion. He had locked the cage. She was now forbidden from even sitting on the front porch. Mrs. Gable brought her meals on a tray, her grim face a silent telegraph of sympathy and fear. The wedding was 2 days away. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at her. She had to get out. But how? She had no money, no allies except Maeve, and involving her was a risk Rosalind wasn't willing to take. But Finch had made a mistake. In his anger, he had become careless. He let something slip during his tirade the night before. "You think you're better than this, with your fancy Eastern name? I know all about the Hayes family, Miss Hayes. I know about the scandal. I know why you had to run." The blood had drained from her face. He knew. He had known all along. This wasn't a simple matrimonial arrangement. It was a trap. He hadn't just purchased a wife. He had purchased a prisoner, one whose past he could hold over her head like an axe. The knowledge was paralyzing, but then a new, colder thought took root. If he knew about her past, it meant he had investigated her. And a man like Finch, a man obsessed with control and information, would have records. He would have a weakness. She just had to find it. Late Friday afternoon, while Finch was at the bank, she slipped into the small, dusty study at the back of the house. The room smelled of old paper and stale cigars. It was the room of a man who cared only for law and money. Her fingers traced the spines of legal texts and county records. Then she saw it. Tucked clumsily between two oversized books was a heavy, leather-bound ledger. The front was embossed with a single word: acquisitions. Her heart began to pound. A voice in her head screamed at her to put it back, to walk away. But a stronger, more desperate voice urged her on. With trembling hands, she opened it. The pages were filled with Finch's tight, spidery script. At first, it looked like a simple accounting of land and livestock, but then a pattern emerged. Names of small ranchers, homesteaders, families she'd heard mentioned in town. Next to each name was a series of dates, notations of loans from Finch's bank. A few pages later, the same name would appear again, under a new heading: foreclosure. He was a predator, using his bank as a weapon, offering loans with impossible terms, then seizing the land when the inevitable default came. He was systematically bleeding the valley dry, but the real poison was tucked into the back of the ledger, a folded document. It was a water rights agreement for Blackwood Creek, the lifeblood of Kalen Blackwood's ranch. The signature of the county official on the document looked wrong. The ink was a slightly different shade, the slant of the letters just a little too perfect. Beneath it, in the ledger, was another entry: L. Pike, payment for services rendered, $200, a forgery. He wasn't just trying to bully Blackwood. He was trying to execute his ranch, to choke it to death. This was a death sentence in this arid land. And then she found the final, chilling piece. On the very last page, a single cryptic entry: Martha B. inquiry settled. Permanent relocation arranged. Martha B. Rosalind's blood ran cold. She remembered hearing Maeve mention the name. Martha Blevins, the previous school teacher. A spirited young woman who had publicly argued with Finch over a land deed a year ago. She had relocated suddenly, they said, packed up in the middle of the night. No one knew where she went. Permanent relocation arranged. It wasn't a business entry. It was an epitaph. A floorboard creaked in the hall. Rosalind's head shot up, her eyes wide with terror. She shoved the ledger back onto the shelf just as the study door swung open. Alistair Finch stood there. His eyes swept the room, and for a terrifying second, they lingered on the shelf where she'd just replaced the book. He knew. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was dangerously soft. I was looking for a book," she stammered, her mind screaming. "Something to read." He took a step into the room, his shadow falling over her. "I have told you," he said, his voice a silken threat. "Your place is to prepare yourself. Tomorrow you become Mrs. Alistair Finch. You will be a reflection of my status. You will be perfect." He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his touch as cold as a snake's belly. "Do not disappoint me, Rosalind. I do not abide disappointment." He turned and left, closing the door softly. The click of the latch was like a cell door locking. She sank into a chair, shaking uncontrollably. The gilded cage was a predator's lair. She wasn't marrying a tyrant, she was marrying a murderer. There would be no wedding. Running was no longer about escaping a bad marriage. It was about escaping her own grave. And now she knew his secrets. He would never, ever let her go. Her only hope was the man Finch was trying to destroy. Her decision was made. Tonight she would run, and she would run straight to the wolf. Night fell like a shroud. Rosalind sat on the edge of her bed, her small traveling valise packed. Inside were a few essentials and the tattered copy of Jane Eyre. But the most important item wasn't in the bag. Tucked into the bodice of her dress, the forged water rights document felt like a block of ice against her skin. She crept back into the study after Finch left for a late meeting at the bank, her hands shaking as she pulled the paper from the ledger. It was her only weapon. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, each sound a hammer blow counting down the seconds of her life. Mrs. Gable had brought her dinner tray, her eyes asking 1,000 silent questions Rosalind couldn't answer. Rosalind had simply squeezed the older woman's hand, a farewell that went unspoken. Around 10, she heard the front door open and close. Finch was home. She heard his footsteps go down the hall to his own bedroom. She held her breath, listening, waiting. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, the house settled into a deep, oppressive silence. Now. She slipped off her shoes, holding them in one hand, the valise in the other. Every creak of the floorboards was a cannon shot in the stillness. She crept down the back staircase, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The kitchen was a landscape of monstrous shadows. The back door was her goal. She reached it, her fingers fumbling with the heavy bolt. It was stiff. She put her shoulder into it, gritting her teeth as it slid open with a groan of protesting metal. She froze, listened. Nothing. She slipped outside, the cool night air a shock to her system. She didn't look back at the white prison. She scurried across the yard, using the shadows of the outbuildings for cover, and slipped through the back gate. The town was dark, save for the rowdy yellow lights spilling from the saloon. Maeve O'Connell had once told her where the Blackwood Creek Ranch was. 10 miles north, she'd said, her eyes sharp. A long walk for a lady in a good dress. A long walk was an understatement. It was a pilgrimage into the unknown. She stuck to the back alleys, her heart leaping at every dog's bark, every rustle of unseen things in the sagebrush. Slowly, the lights of Redemption Gulch faded behind her. She was alone on a dark road under a canopy of cold, indifferent stars. The wilderness she had seen from her window was now a living, breathing entity. The howl of a distant coyote sent a spear of primal fear through her. She stumbled twice, her hands scraped raw, the hem of her dress torn, but she pushed on, fueled by the image of Finch's cold face and the name whispered on the last page of his ledger. Martha B. Hours crawled by. Her legs were screaming, her throat was a desert. Adrenaline had given way to a bone-deep exhaustion. Doubt began to poison her resolve. What was she doing? Running to a man the whole town feared, a man who had looked at her with a possessiveness that was different from Finch's, but just as potent. What if he turned her away? Just as despair threatened to swallow her whole, she saw it, a faint flickering light, a lamp in a window. As she got closer, she could make out the dark, sprawling shapes of ranch buildings against the horizon. The Blackwood Creek Ranch. She had made it. She approached the main house, a long, low building of dark wood and river stone that looked as if it had grown out of the land itself. A dog erupted in a volley of deep, menacing barks. A light appeared in another window. The front door opened. A man stood silhouetted against the lamplight, a rifle held loosely in his hands. It wasn't Kalen. "State your business," the man called out, his voice rough. I need to see Mr. Blackwood," Rosalind choked out. "It's urgent." The man squinted into the darkness. "It's the middle of the night, ma'am. Who's asking?" "My name is Rosalind Hayes." A beat of stunned silence. The man lowered his rifle slightly. He clearly heard the name. "Wait here." He vanished inside. The seconds stretched, each one an hour. Rosalind stood in the yard, exposed, vulnerable, the barking dog her only companion. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. Finally, the door opened again. Kalen Blackwood stood there. He wore only a pair of dark trousers, his chest and feet bare. The lamplight carved his powerful physique from the shadows. His face was a thunderous mask of shock and disbelief as he took in her torn dress, her scratched hands, her exhausted, desperate face. He strode toward her, covering the distance in 3 long, urgent steps. "Hayes," he said, his voice a rough whisper that was shockingly gentle. "What in God's name happened? Did he hurt you?" The question was laced with a barely controlled violence. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to stream down her face. The terror and exhaustion of the past days came pouring out. She couldn't speak. She could only reach into her dress, her fingers closing around the folded paper. She pulled it out and held it up to him, her hands shaking so badly he had to steady it with his own. His touch was warm and firm, a jolt of life against her cold skin. He took the document, his eyes scanning it in the moonlight. His expression hardened, the muscles in his jaw clenching as he recognized the forgery. He looked from the paper back to her face, and his eyes softened with a dawning, fierce understanding. He knew, without her saying a word, the risk she had taken. "You were never going to marry him, were you?" he said. It wasn't a question. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't." He carefully folded the document and tucked it into his pocket. Then, without another word, he reached out, scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and carried her toward the light and warmth of his house. As he crossed the threshold, he kicked the door shut behind them, sealing them in, sealing the rest of the world out. In that moment, Rosalind knew she had fled a gilded cage and run straight into the den of a wolf. But as he held her, safe and solid against his chest, she realized with a startling, breathtaking clarity that she had never in her entire life felt more free. Kalen's house was the polar opposite of Finch's sterile mansion. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, surrounded by worn leather chairs. Books overflowed from shelves on engineering and poetry and history. The air smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and leather. It was a place that was lived in, a place that was real. He set her down gently in a chair by the hearth, draping a heavy wool blanket over her shoulders before handing her a cup of steaming, heavily sweetened coffee. "Drink," he commanded softly, "then tell me everything." And she did. The story poured out of her. The ledger, the predatory loans, the forged document, the final, chilling entry about Martha Blevins. She told him about Finch's rage, his suffocating control, his knowledge of her past. Kalen listened without moving, his dark eyes fixed on her face, his stillness that of a predator coiled to strike. When she finished, a tense silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "He won't just let you go," Kalen said finally, his voice flat and hard. "When he finds you're gone, he'll come looking. He'll bring the law with him. Sheriff Coleman is his man." "The document," she said, her voice stronger now. "It's proof." "It's his word against that of a hysterical woman," Kalen countered grimly. "And the word of a half-breed he's been trying to discredit for years. He owns this town, Rosalind. Or he thinks he does." He stood and began to pace, the firelight playing across the hard planes of his bare chest and back. "But he made two mistakes. He underestimated you." He stopped and looked at her, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "And he picked a fight with me." He paused. "My mother was Apache. Her people lived on this land for generations. My father was a white surveyor who fell in love with her. When he died, he left this ranch to me. Finch has never forgiven it. He sees this land, my land, as an insult to his sense of order. He cheated my mother's family out of the southern pastures years ago, before I was old enough to stop him. This isn't just about water rights, Rosalind. This is about everything. The personal history, the deep-seated feud, clicked everything into place. This wasn't just a rivalry. It was a war that had been raging long before she arrived. She wasn't just a catalyst. She was the spark that was about to set the whole territory ablaze. The sky was just beginning to bruise with the first hints of dawn when the sound came, the distant thunder of approaching horses. Kalen was already dressed, standing by the window, a Winchester rifle in his hand. "He's here," he said calmly, "and he brought Coleman and his hired guns." Fear, cold and sharp, twisted in her gut. "What are we going to do?" "Stay inside, stay away from the windows," he ordered. His wiry foreman, Sam, appeared from a back room, a shotgun cradled in his arms. The two men exchanged a look of grim, complete understanding. This was the battle they had been waiting for their whole lives. Kalen stepped out onto the porch. Rosalind watched, her heart in her throat, from the shadows of the doorway. Alistair Finch sat on a fine black horse, his face a mask of incandescent rage. Sheriff Coleman looked sick to his stomach. Two rough-looking men flanked them, their hands resting on their holsters. "Blackwood!" Finch screamed, his voice cracking. "You have my property! Send out the woman!" Kalen leaned his rifle against the porch post, an act of casual, infuriating defiance. "The lady is a guest in my home, Finch. She's not going anywhere." "She is my betrothed," Finch spat. She fled in the night like a common thief. She came here seeking protection. Kalen's voice was dangerously soft, yet it carried across the yard with chilling clarity. Protection from a thief, a forger, and a murderer. Finch went pale. Sheriff, you hear this? He's making baseless accusations. Coleman shifted uncomfortably. Blackwood, the law is on Mr. Finch's side. A contract was made. I have to speak with Miss Hayes. The lady has nothing to say to you, Bart, Kalen said, his eyes narrowing. But she did bring me this. Kalen reached into his coat and produced the forged document. He held it up. Recognize this, Finch? Your attempt to steal my water, signed by a county official who, as I recall, lost his writing hand in a mill accident 5 years ago. A miracle he was able to sign so elegantly. Sheriff Coleman stared at the paper, his face a mixture of shock and dawning horror. It's a lie, a fabrication, Finch blustered, but his voice was thin. Is it? Kalen pressed on, relentless. Miss Hayes also told me about your ledger, the one you call acquisitions, the one detailing how you've been bleeding this valley dry for years. And she told me about the last name in that book, Martha Blevins. You remember her, don't you, Sheriff? The school teacher who vanished? Finch made an entry about her permanent relocation. Coleman flinched as if struck. The color drained from his face. He knew. Of course he knew. He had helped cover it up. Sheriff, Finch pleaded, his composure finally shattering. Arrest him. Sheriff Coleman looked from Finch's panicked face to Kalen's stony one. He saw the damning paper. He saw the ghost of Martha Blevins. And in that moment, Bart Coleman chose his soul over his pension. Alistair, the sheriff said, his voice heavy with resignation. Forgery is a federal crime. And what he's saying about Martha, I think you'd best come back to town with me. You work for me? Finch shrieked, his mask of civility ripped away, revealing the snarling animal beneath. I own you. Not anymore, Coleman said quietly. It was then that one of Finch's hired guns, a brutish man named Hobbs, decided to force the issue. He drew his pistol, but he never got the chance to aim it. The Winchester was in Kalen's hands so fast it was a blur. A single shot echoed through the valley, and Hobbs's pistol went flying from his hand, his fingers a bloody mess. In the ringing silence, Kalen leveled the rifle squarely at Finch's chest. Defeat settled over Finch like a shroud. He saw the cold, deadly promise in Kalen's eyes. He saw his other hired gun subtly backing his horse away. He saw the newfound resolve on the sheriff's face. He was alone, broken. Without another word, he turned his horse and, flanked by a silent Sheriff Coleman, rode away from the Blackwood Creek Ranch, a ruined man riding toward his own reckoning. As the dust settled, Rosalind stepped out onto the porch. The sun was fully up now, bathing the valley in a clean golden light. Kalen turned to her, the rifle still in his hand, his face unreadable. The battle was over. Her past was over, and a new, terrifying, and uncertain future was just beginning. In the days that followed, Redemption Gulch imploded. The story of Finch's ledger, confiscated by a suddenly righteous Sheriff Coleman, ripped through the valley. Families Finch had ruined found their voices. The bank was seized by territorial marshals. Finch himself vanished, slipping away in the night before the federal charges came down. Some said he fled to Mexico. No one really cared. His reign of terror was over. Rosalind remained at the Blackwood Creek Ranch in a state of strange limbo. Kalen gave her a room of her own, treating her with a quiet, watchful courtesy. They ate their meals together, speaking of books, of the ranch, of anything but what lay between them. The fierce possessiveness she'd seen in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, unnerving respect. He was giving her space. He was letting her heal, and she was healing. The Arizona sun and the rhythms of the ranch were a balm. The pale, frightened woman from the east was burning away, revealing someone stronger underneath. She found a purpose in the simple, honest work, helping in the kitchen, mending clothes, discovering a resilience she never knew she had. About a week after Finch's fall, she found Kalen by the corral at twilight, staring out at the mountains. The stagecoach for Santa Fe leaves on Tuesday, she said, her voice steady. Maeve told me there's a school there that needs a teacher. Kaylin didn't turn, but she saw his shoulders tense. Is that what you want? He asked, his voice low. To go back to teaching children their letters? I want a life of my own making, she replied honestly. I came west to escape one trap and fell into another. You freed me, Kaylin. I will be forever grateful, but I cannot trade one keeper for another. At that, he turned to face her, his dark eyes searching her face. Did you ever think, he said softly, that I didn't see a woman who needed a keeper? That I saw a woman who needed a partner? He took a step closer. When I saw you on that platform, I didn't see a delicate flower from the east. I saw a fighter. I saw a woman with a fire in her that this whole territory couldn't extinguish. Finch wanted to own you to put that fire out. I just wanted to see it burn. Her heart, which she had guarded so fiercely, began to beat faster. You said, at the station, you looked at me as if I was yours. My words were for him, Kaylin corrected gently. A challenge, a warning. What I felt, what I feel, is something else. It isn't about ownership, it's about recognition. My soul recognized yours, Rosalind Hayes. It's as simple and as complicated as that. He reached out not to grab her, but to gently cup her chin, his thumb stroking her cheek. His touch was electric. I don't have a white mansion to offer you, he said, his voice a low rumble. I have this, the land, the work, the freedom. I don't want a docile wife to sit in a quiet parlor. I want a queen to ride by my side. Build this life with me, Rosalind. Not as a bride I ordered, but as the woman you choose to be. Be my partner. Be my equal. Be mine. Not because I claim you, but because you choose me. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. This was the choice she had never been given. She looked past him, at the vast, wild land stretching to the horizon. It was no longer intimidating. It was home. They called me a mail-order bride, she whispered, a small smile playing on her lips as she looked back into his intense, waiting eyes. And what do you call yourself now? He asked. Free, she said. And leaning forward, she closed the distance between them, sealing her choice with a kiss, a promise made not by contract, but under a vast, starlit sky. Rosalind Hayes came to a dusty town as a mail-order bride, a piece of property in a transaction. She found her destiny not in that contract, but in an act of breathtaking courage. She discovered that true freedom isn't about escaping your past, but about having the strength to choose your own future. Her story and Kaylin Blackwood's became a legend in the territory, a tale of a fierce heart that refused to be caged, and a wild soul who recognized its equal. They proved that the strongest bonds aren't forged in ownership, but in a partnership built on respect, defiance, and the unforgiving beauty of the land itself. If you enjoyed this story of strength, passion, and redemption, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a tale where the hero forges her own destiny. And for more stories from the untamed frontier, make sure you subscribe to the channel.